Hi folks, I'm Greg McLawsen, the Affidavit of Support lawyer. I help green card holders enforce the USCIS Form I-864 in federal court, and I serve as a consulting expert when the Affidavit of Support is enforced in divorce proceedings. Today, the I-864A contract between sponsor and household member. What are the obligations of somebody who signs this? Are they any different than the Affidavit of Support? We can get into the technicalities in a minute, but the bottom line is that you can think about the household member contract as the same thing as an affidavit of support when it comes to the liability of somebody who signs this document. So at the end of the day, it's just like an affidavit of support in terms of the financial obligation that's owed to the sponsored immigrant and as to the obligation to repay public benefits that are provided by the government. But let's get a little bit into the technicalities of the form. So as you can see at the top of the I-864A, it identifies this document as being a contract not between the sponsor and the U.S. government, which is the case with the Affidavit of Support, but instead, for an I-864A, the contract is between the household member who signs this form and an Affidavit of Support sponsor. Basically, the household member is saying, I, by signing this form, am making my income available to you, the sponsor, so that you, the sponsor, can meet your financial wherewithal to demonstrate your ability to be an Affidavit of Support sponsor. That's a little bit weird. I'm not totally sure why the government drafted the document this way, but it's household member telling sponsor that their income can be used for a different Affidavit of Support. When you look, though, at the obligation that's actually incurred by signing this document, you can see that it's actually the same substantively as what an Affidavit of Support sponsor has to do. So the primary obligation here, and the thing that I spend most of my law practice doing, is this obligation to provide the immigrant with any financial resources necessary to maintain their income at 125% of the poverty guideline. So this is the same thing that a I-864 sponsor promises to do. If that isn't fulfilled, the sponsored immigrant has a legal right to sue the Affidavit of Support sponsor for this financial support. And the beneficiary of the affidavit can do the same thing against the I-864A household member. So for legal purposes, a joint sponsor or a sponsor or an I-864 household member are all in the same position when it comes to the immigrant's ability to enforce this financial obligation. I'll go ahead and put some case citations in the footnotes to this video, but the bottom line is that when it comes to this financial obligation, it's functionally the same, regardless of whether we're talking about an Affidavit of Support or an I-864A household member contract. In either case, the liability is joint and several, meaning that the sponsored immigrant can choose to sue the sponsor and the household member, or either the household member or the sponsor. Either of those people has the same legal obligation and the same legal exposure to the sponsored immigrant. Note that the household member, by signing this contract, also has the responsibility to repay the cost of means-tested benefits provided to the immigrant. Now, this has always been the case under the Affidavit of Support. It is also true that it is rarely enforced by federal, state, or local agencies, meaning that yes, a household member does have liability, theoretically, to repay the cost of things like Medicaid that are provided to affidavit beneficiaries. But in reality, this is rarely done by any agency that I'm familiar with anywhere in the United States. That's not to say that you shouldn't take this contract seriously, but I'm simply observing that right now, as a practical matter, this doesn't seem to happen very often, if ever. However, for this other obligation, the obligation to provide income support to affidavit beneficiaries, that absolutely is something that is enforced. There are over 150 federal lawsuits all throughout the United States where affidavit sponsors have been held liable. I will cite to the cases where affidavit of support household members have also been sued. So this definitely needs to be taken seriously. At the end of the day, the way that I recommend you think about the I-864A is simply think about it as the affidavit of support, because the obligations imposed by it are the same. So you should treat it as seriously as if you were signing the I-864 affidavit of support. It's a binding contract. Courts consistently have held over the past 10 years that this contract is enforceable, so take it seriously. If you have questions about specific issues under the I-864A, feel free to drop them into the comments. If you are the beneficiary, the immigrant who has been sponsored by an affidavit of support, and there's a household member in your case, feel free to reach out to us for an individualized case consultation. We do Zoom meetings all across the United States. Hope that's helpful, folks.